Hey everyone, Dan from RcMadLabz here. Today I put a video together to share what we love the most about the hobby, the building, upgrading, and customizing. Our products are based on the Arrma 3 and 4S model lineup for good reason. These models share a common design which allows for customization. So let's get right into it. Let's start by talking about a few specific Arrma 3S and 4S BLX brushless models. Now what I'm covering here applies to some of the other Arrma 3S models, such as the Mega Series and Boost Series. My goal is to get you more familiar with the chassis and suspension types and how they are cross-compatible. Let's start with the different chassis. Left to right, shortest to longest. The Arrma 3S Granite and Vortex use the SWB chassis, short wheelbase. The new Arrma 4S Outcast version 2 uses a slightly longer chassis called the MWB, medium wheelbase. Next up is the LWB, or long wheelbase. The Arrma 3S Typhon, Senton, and Big Rock use this chassis. The XLWB extra long wheelbase chassis belongs to the new Arrma 4S Creighton version 2. There are 3 different width suspensions that Arrma uses on these models, all of which are compatible with every chassis that we have covered. As we go over these different types of suspensions, keep in mind that if you're doing something custom, you need to swap the matching group of parts, not just one item. The group of parts involves upper camber links, steering tie rods, steering blocks, C-hubs, rear hubs, drive shafts, along with the lower control arms. The short wheelbase, Arrma Granite and Vortex use the short arm suspension design. So does the long wheelbase Arrma 3S Senton. The long wheelbase Arrma 3S Typhon and Big Rock version 3 use the long arm suspension design. The new medium wheelbase Outcast and extra long wheelbase Arrma 4S Creighton version 2 use the extra long suspension design. Special note on these, they also use anti-sway bars. While we're on the topic of suspension arms, I wanted to share my experiences with RPM name brand arms for the Arrma 3S line. Here's an upgraded Typhon that after a few packs, you can see how soft the arms are and what they did. For what's available aftermarket, we find that the stock Arrma arms are the way to go. Okay, drive shafts. Just the same as the suspension, if you're doing something custom, you need to match the drive shaft type to the arm type being used. The Granite, Vortex, and Senton all have the short arm suspension and use the short plastic composite sliding drive shafts with 14mm wheel hexes. I recommend these hot racing hex adapters to convert from 14mm wheel hex size to 17. They also add 10mm of width and fit the stock axles, aftermarket axles perfectly without any excess slop. They're very good quality. The stock plastic composite drive shafts are weak, and an affordable upgrade is the RcAWD steel CVD drive shafts. With proper use and maintenance, we've had good luck with these. Another option for the short arms is the Arrma composite CVD. For the long drive shafts that match the long arms, we have two models, but really only one choice. The 3S Typhon uses special larger diameter stub axles and matching factory 17mm wheel hexes. The tolerances are off with these parts, and that allows for play in the wheels that can't be shimmed out. The Big Rock version 3 uses the same long drive shafts, but with a 14mm wheel hex. These are what most people would want to use when customizing the suspension on a different chassis. The same hot racing hex adapters I recommended for the short drive shafts work for the long drive shafts. When it comes to aftermarket options for upgrading the long stock plastic drive shafts, I obviously recommend our custom length RcAWD ones. There is another option worth mentioning, and they are made by Hot Racing. The new 4S version 2 models, using the extra long arms, use a extra long composite CVD drive shaft with matching 17mm wheel hexes. Differentials and slipper clutches. Okay. All of the 3S Arrma models use the same plastic ring and pinion design with metal internal gears. The new 4S Outcast and Creighton version 2 use a stronger metal ring and pinion design with metal internal gears. I definitely recommend replacing your plastic 3S diff with the stronger metal version from the 4S version 2 Outcast or Creighton when your plastic diff strips out. Another weakness in all the 3S and 4S models is the plastic rear diff yoke. This part mounts and holds in position the ring and pinion assembly. Upgrading to an aluminum diff yoke will guarantee that your ring and pinion gear mesh will stay constant. This is most important to do for the rear differential, as the front differential receives less torque from the motor compared to the rear due to a properly set slipper clutch and the slipper clutch location. All 3S models come with a slipper clutch utilizing a plastic spur gear and 3 slipper pads. The new 4S Outcast and Creighton version 2 use a slipper clutch utilizing a metal spur gear and 4 slipper pads. Don't get too excited about this 4th slipper pad. It's installed as a spacer within the slipper clutch assembly. The increased performance is from a larger pad and disc contact area. The slipper clutch will fit all of the Arrma 3S models. Now let's talk about shock options. For the 3S models I've mentioned here, there are 2 different lengths the models come with. An easy upgrade is to change out your 3S shocks for the new 4S V2 ones. They can be found for around $40 or so on eBay from sellers like Jenny's RC. Another option for around the same price as the new 4S version 2 shocks would be to use Arrma 6S shocks. The Arrma Mojave 6S shocks are a good choice to start with. They're priced right. And again, these can be found on eBay from sellers like Jenny's RC. Then there's this option that many describe as the best budget shock upgrade. It really isn't though, because to get the shocks to perform, you have to buy and install better shock pistons. You add that to the cost, and you could have just started out with the better quality Arrma 6S shocks. To install the Arrma 6S shocks or the ZD Racing shocks, you're going to need these upper shock bushings. No matter what shocks you're using on the 3S and 4S Arrma models, you need to use tubing to tune the suspension because of the lack of suspension droop screws. The length of the shocks determine the amount of droop and, more importantly, the operating angle of the drive shafts. Tuning the shocks for minimum and maximum drive shaft angle is always overlooked, and typically is the reason why we have drive shaft failures. When running our ExtremeDuty chassis brace on your model, and using Arrma 6S or ZD Racing shocks, we recommend to use these springs. Pay attention to the spring rates that you're seeing. This is where we recommend you start. Here are a couple of charts showing spring rates and part numbers. I find the best results by selecting a spring rate that requires no spring preload adjustment, or at least very little adjustment. This spring rate for the model I'm setting up will have the best handling for rough terrain and average jumps. Finding that perfect spring rate has everything to do with the weight of your model, and not everyone's model is the exact same weight. Shock towers and body options. There are 3 versions of shock towers. The Vortex using the shorter shocks. I recommend matching your shock towers to the suspension design that you're wanting to run. An example, the Vortex shock towers for the truggy style shorter suspension. Use the standard shock towers for the longer suspensions, and the new 4S version 2 Outcast and Creighton shock towers for the extra long suspension. Remember, the new 4S version 2 shock towers and suspension use anti-sway bars. I have listed here the lengths of the chassis to aid in identifying what one you have. As the models get used, the stickers with the model's serial number and chassis number tend to get lost. When you're wanting to use a custom body, these are the needed measurements you'll want to use for fitment of your new body. Mounting a different body can be done by using a universal adjustable body post found on eBay, or you can even use the stock Arrma parts. Now that you know that these items are able to be swapped between the different chassis, my last pieces of advice are to print off the exploded parts views for the models you're working on from Horizon Hobby's website, so you can easily compare the models and part numbers side by side. Be sure to search eBay for your parts. A lot of the time, sellers like Jenny's RC part out brand new models and sell parts in batches or grouped together, saving you money.